through my office soon.
Question is the House do now adjourn, and I call the member for Solomon.
Thank you, Speaker. On Monday, before the sun came up, Serco took 2 Sri Lankan Tamil refugees from the cramped Darwin cabin they'd been kept in for more than a year. They were put on a charter flight and sent back to Nauru. Parmika and her husband, Kiru Bakaran, had asked to go back to Nauru. Kiru has been accepted by the United States as a refugee, and they're waiting to complete the process to have Parmika accepted as well. But even so, they figured they were better off on Nauru than being locked up in indefinite detention in Darwin, the electorate that I represent. The conditions that they and 9 other refugees were living in were appalling, each sleeping in single bunk beds, not getting the medical treatment that they were brought to Darwin for, not being told what the medications are that were being administered to them. A migration agent told me their diet was poor due to being provided takeaway meals from the Mercure Hotel that are routinely unpalatable. The migration agent said, and I quote, "They are often given reused leftovers and is regularly unhygienic with hairs, insects and even maggots," end quote. Mr Speaker, that's deplorable, it's disgusting, it's unacceptable. Parmika and Kiru told one of my staff that the only good thing about their year in detention in Darwin, in a small cabin, was the kindness shown to them by Darwin locals, and I commend those Territorians who have been keeping up the fight and working so hard to get these refugees released. They are demonstrating tremendous humanity, and it's a shame that the federal government can't do the same. There are still 9 refugees, all Iranian, being held in Darwin. All of them have been there for more than a year. I've met with representatives of all 3 families that remain. They've sat with me and told me about the suffering and their struggles. I met with 33-year-old Abbas Magames, who is being detained along with his father Yaqub and mother Malike and his sister Hajar. He's angry and frustrated. His family are Hawazi Arabs from southwestern Iran who are discriminated against by that government. Their participation in politics and employment is limited. They cannot exercise their cultural rights and have been arrested and imprisoned because of their religion. The Magames family have been in some sort of detention for 8 years, since 2013. They've been on Christmas Island and Nauru. They were brought to Darwin more than a year ago for medical treatment that they still haven't received. Their mental and physical health is suffering enormously. Also met with Mojtama Hamadani. He's being detained alongside his wife Afsneh and her son Behnam. He's a construction specialist and his wife was a hairdresser for more than 20 years. Behnam was a child when they fled Iran in 2013 and never got to finish his schooling. Mojtaba says, and I quote, "We spent 7 years of our short life with no prospects to rebuild our lives, no safety and inadequate health care on Nauru." End quote. The extended suffering of all these refugees has been perpetrated by those opposite. They should hang their heads in shame. I received a letter this week co-signed by a number of angry Darwin residents, lawyers and public servants and academics and nurses, plumbers and teachers and administrators. They call the alternative place of detention in Darwin, and I quote, "a concentration camp." They write, "These refugees were incarcerated in a concentration camp built on Nauru for 7 years in indescribable conditions. Searing heat, tent accommodation, scant privacy, abuse and exposure to all kinds of horror. This included lip stitching and other forms of self-mutilation, including self-immolation, assaults, child abuse, sexual assaults and mental breakdowns. PTSD, severe anxiety disorders, severe depression were prevalent. They were given numbers, not names, to identify themselves in the deliberate, dehumanising cruelty which has been Australia's policy towards these innocents." End quote. They call this policy barbaric and they're not wrong. They call this Australia's disgrace and it must end. I call on Minister Dutton to release these remaining 9 refugees into community detention immediately, let them out and shut it down immediately.